Everyone, today I wanted to make a video about the impacts of policies meant to tackle climate change and how these policies are having a real impact on the real estate market. We know that as the climate change debate continues, policies are being implemented all over the world to tackle the so-called climate change crisis. The World Economic Forum, for instance, on the future of real estate says that with buildings contributing 38% of all energy-related greenhouse gas emissions, business leaders have a critical role to play in lowering their global real estate emissions. We have been presented with the idea that property values are driven by climate change. Forbes article that I wanted to share with you states the following. So this article is saying the impacts of climate change on the real estate market. Higher temperatures lead to more extreme weather system and an increase in large-scale incidents from massive hurricanes to wildfires, from gale force storms to flooding. Where the real estate market is concerned, these incidents are making it tougher to manage the costs and condition of property on a yearly basis. It's also saying, article goes on to say that an increase in temperature can also have a direct impact on the cost of managing rental property. It is projected that more tenants will rely on electricity. That's because they're making policy that requires towns and cities to be on the grid, and we're moving away from natural gas. So they're saying it's projected more tenants will rely on electricity to run fans and HVAC systems to stay cool. The same goes for an increase in water usage. These trends can place a higher burden on the electrical grid and city resources. As we know, especially here in California, our electrical grid is basically failing and is having real trouble in handling the existing grid, the existing usage that we have right now. As a property owner, you're paying an increase cost for those utilities along with your tenants. The more demand for these resources, the more expensive they become. We're seeing these costs rise in real time. So basically, we're being told that property values and certain locations are not going to be very desirable. And in order to change these, we are going to need to make some changes in the way we manage our rentals, in the way we manage our own homes. They say weather-related property damage can have a serious impact on your bottom line. Basically, it doesn't matter where you look. If you can look California, we're having wildfires. We have been having wildfires for a long time. Also, hurricanes in, say, Florida. Every area is going to have some kind of natural disaster. These weather-related calamities become incessant. The properties that are located in these areas start to lose their appeal. In the case of rental properties, tenants don't want to live in weather-plagued locales under constant threat of next natural disaster. So they're saying that the steps that we can take right now to mitigate these burdens by going green in the real estate industry, that means smarter consumption, reducing our carbon footprint, and choosing better materials to construct properties that are ready to face the challenges of our climate. Let's now take a look at the implementation of this green agenda mandates and actually how that's also being implemented through monetary policy and fiscal policy. So let's just take a look real quick. For example, we have that last year, the Biden administration passed the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, which makes a historic down payment on deficit reduction to fight inflation. We know that the inflation rate has been right around 7%, and the effective inflation rate is probably anywhere between 10 to 12%, depending on who you ask. But it says that the down payment on deficit reduction to fight inflation, invest in the domestic energy production and manufacturing, and reduce carbon emissions by roughly 40% by 2030. The bill will also finally allow Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug prices and expand the Affordable Care Act program for 3 years through 2025. The new proposal will invest approximately $300 billion in deficit reduction and $369 billion in energy security and climate change programs over the next 10 years. Additionally, the agreement calls for comprehensive permitting reform legislation to be passed before the end of the fiscal year. Permitting reform is essential to unlocking domestic energy and transmission projects, which will lower the cost for consumers and help us meet our long-term emission goals. So this definitely has been a high priority for the Biden administration. They're looking to lower energy costs, increase cleaner production, and reduce carbon emissions by roughly 40% by 2030. Also wanted to show the critique by a congressman from Missouri about the Inflation Reduction Act, and Congressman Blaine Meyer, hope I'm pronouncing that right, from Missouri. He said that this was on August 12th when they voted for the bill. The House will vote on the so-called, it's already been passed, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the bill the Senate passed on Monday that could devastate our economy even further. As our nation experiences recession and historic inflation, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to spend even more hard-earned taxpayer dollars in the name of inflation reduction. The name itself is an insult to the intelligence of Americans across the country, as spending more taxpayer dollars to bring down inflation rates makes no sense at all. Inflation occurs when too much money is trying to purchase too few goods. This bill will add hundreds of billions of dollars into our economy. On top of that, it institute new taxes that will raise the cost of the goods we buy and harm small businesses. Despite claims that the bill will not affect families making less than $400,000, there are new taxes that will directly affect you. Also, his opinion goes on to say, in an effort to applaud this piece of legislation, the left-leaning Washington Post called the Inflation Reduction Act what really is the biggest burst of spending in U.S. history to tackle global warming. This bill will spend more than $350 billion in the Green New Deal initiatives. It includes $3 billion for the Postal Service to buy new electric mail trucks, and another $1 billion for electric heavy-duty vehicles like garbage trucks. There is another $60 billion for environmental justice. Crime might be rampant in cities across America, and violent criminals are being set free on no cash bail every day, but at least they are prioritizing environmental justice. So basically, the point he's trying to make is that the housing prices are not set by climate change. There are, impact. The crime is going to have a huge impact on the desirability of neighborhoods and areas across the country. So we should be tackling, the government should be doing its duty, which is to protect the citizens and not to impose more taxes and intervene in the private sector on how people are supposed to build houses, or how counties and cities should be in the business of the so-called decarbonizing buildings to make it more green, which is, as we're going to see here shortly, having an impact on the bottom line. So let's take a look at how these green mandates are having an effect in the state of California. And this is an article from the Times of San Diego. Green building mandates will increase the cost of housing in California. We're seeing that during the last few months, we have seen this real estate sales decline across the United States. Of course, we have the hike of interest rates coupled with high inflation, and also the green mandates have had their own impact on the cost of building, and therefore there is also being a decline on building new homes. Let's take a look at that. Despite the exorbitant cost of homes in California, Sacramento continues to chase policies that increase housing prices. Apparently, some pursuits, particularly the quest for a green future, are more important than others. The California Energy Commission, whose 5 unelected members clearly understand what's expected of them politically, voted on August 11, the state's 2022 Energy Code that's actually already been passed. It requires new commercial buildings, including multifamily housing, to be equipped with expensive solar panels, as well as batteries, the size of which will be considerably enough to crowd a space that will otherwise be utilized by residential and commercial rent-paying tenants. The regulations also demand that single-family homes must be electric-ready for electric vehicle chargers and other appliances. We have a failing grid. So let's take a look. I mean, how is that going to impact the failing grid? Are we going to have to take turns to charge cars? To transition away, we're transitioning away from natural gas. There was another article today that I read from the Epoch Times that talked about how the supply of natural gas is being diminished because they're, of course, banning any extraction of it. And they are limiting the supply of natural gas. And the state of California is seeing outrageous prices for natural gas, which is going to just make people just be under the electric grid, and establish the use of heat pumps. So they want to transition away from natural gas and establish the use of heat pumps as the energy efficiency baseline. Will Vincent, a manager at the CEC's Building Standard Office, calls them the star of the new energy code. However, Bob Reimer of the California Building Industry Association says installing heat pumps rather than gas appliances could increase developers' costs. The mandates go into effect January 1st, 2023, which they already came into effect. And the standards follow the rules which took effect in January 2020 that require all new single-family homes and multifamily housing from 1 to 3 stories to have solar power. So one interesting thing here that the article mentions is that the National Association of Home Builders estimate that for every $1,000 added to the cost of a home in this state, the state of California, nearly 10,000 prospective homeowners are priced out of the market. So that's only making housing more expensive and less affordable. And we already have an affordability issue in the state of California. Most people can't afford a home. Don't assume that renting provides protection from the financial burden of regulation. The California Apartment Association says that the 2020 mandate added roughly $5,000 per unit to apartment construction costs. The additional outlays are passed on to tenants, just as homeowners who lease their properties forward their costs to the occupants. The Energy Commission's estimate also ignores not the possibility, but the certainty that a portion of housing and commercial development will never be built due to the additional regulatory costs. At least they're acknowledging that. Rule makers in the state already losing companies weary of its toxic business environment need to at some point begin to weigh the damage their edicts will cause before they issue orders. Californians should be free to decide for themselves if they want solar panels on their homes and commercial buildings. Requiring solar arrays by regulation strips consumers of a choice that should be theirs to make, in my opinion, infringing in property rights. And of course, the free market is just a way to bring the totalitarian government closer to reality. If solar power installation is such a fine idea, why do lawmakers have to make it now, especially after years of bribing homeowners with subsidies? And that is an excellent point. If somebody wants to use solar power and it's so great and it really, really reduces the cost, why is not everybody doing it, making the choice to do that? Consumers and developers aren't adopting green initiatives as hard and fast as Sacramento wants them to do. So the government apparatus goes to work and requires the behavior it seeks. Naturally, depriving Californians of choice and their dollars is of little concern to lawmakers, regulators, or activists who are themselves largely unregulated and reckless in their pursuit of an elusive and, if not impossible to achieve, net zero carbon emissions environment. The only choices that make better to them are the choices they're making for others. And that's an excellent article. I welcome everybody to read it. So as we have seen, this is definitely going to place a burden, or is already placing a burden on just a regular home builder. There's another article by an organization out of Southern California. I'm going to read right now. It has a report that talks about how Los Angeles building decarbonization, which is basically just bringing the older buildings into the green standards and having them what they call electrified, upgrading, replacing the natural gas appliances with electric appliances, and just making sure that the buildings have been upgraded and retrofits have taken place to make them more efficient. And this article, this study rather, just says that how this is going to be hurting the smaller landowner more than the corporate landowner. We think about, say, BlackRock, how they own so much real estate, commercial and residential real estate. The impact for them is going to be minimal in comparison to how is that going to affect the average landlord, and how that's really going to affect not just the landlords, but tenants as well. In these studies, says corporate consolidation of rental market, corporate landlords already own 67% of the rental units in LA, and data shows corporations are far more likely than small landlords to have habitability code violations and to use the Ellis Act to displace tenants. Decarbonization that treats corporate landlords and mom and pop landlords the same will likely see smaller landlords selling their properties due to the upfront cost and corporate landlords buying them up with poor results for renters. Policy should be different for these different landlord classes and give renters and community land trusts the first option to buy buildings and sell. So this is definitely just placing another burden on the average American who, or the average landlord who might have houses or buildings that they own for rent, and how this is another intrusion on property rights and the right for a free market. What we're seeing, unfortunately, is that at least in California, people won't be able to afford housing at all in the years to come. We have the cost of zero carbon goals are more important to policymakers and politicians in general than the welfare of the citizens who live in the state. With a statewide ban on natural gas appliance sales set for 2030, homeowners will have no other option than all electric when it comes time to replace an appliance on their home's HVAC system. So this new building code that I was talking about earlier was approved in January 1st by the California Energy Commission, which is an unelected group of people, said that the 2022 building code revision that took effect this year does not mandate the use of electricity. However, homes built after January 1st can still have furnaces, stoves, and water heaters fueled with natural gas, but most also have the electrical panels and wiring to power heat pumps, electric vehicles, plug-ins, and electric stoves. But with a state ban on natural gas appliance, of course, they're not making it a requirement right now that is going to be just electric, but as with the state ban of natural gas appliance sales set for 2030, homeowners are not going to have any other option than electric when it comes time to replace an appliance on their home's HVAC system. This goal to reduce the state's carbon footprint is coming at a high price. Consumers now pay 4 times as much electricity as they do for natural gas, and the growing demand for electricity could further strain limited supplies and increase the number of flex alerts when Californians are asked to self-limit their use of electricity to prevent widespread system failures. Unfortunately, these green building compliance and goals that they have set for housing is not just unique to California. We're seeing it all across the United States, for example, and how that's affecting landlords and tenants alike. We see, for example, here, landlord fines for building emissions could hit $900 million by 2030. This is the local law 97. That takes place in New York City could be doing more than 3.7 thousand properties by next year. Local Law 97 is going to be costly to New York City landlords, according to a report and projected fines when the regulations come into effect, where more than 3,700 properties might run afoul to the law and penalties that could soar above $200 million as soon as next year. and penalties are expected to worsen drastically by 2030, the earliest year identified in the law's goal. So the studies projected that homeowners, owners of more than 13,500 properties might be fined $900 million annually. And the goal of this local law 97, of course, is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across city buildings by 40% by 2030 and 8% by 2050. So that's definitely having an impact in New York, and it's having an impact in other towns as well. As I mentioned, California is not the only state that's going through this. We see South Florida also. They have their own climate action strategy. They are also trying to retrofit old buildings and make them compliant to the new emissions goals, cutting emission goals by 50% by 2030. They want to retune and retrofit existing buildings, expand renewable energy generation, build ultra-low energy buildings. So as we can see, also Florida is a state where these actions are getting implemented. We're also seeing the net zero by 2040 equitability plan in Austin, Texas. In September 2021, the city council adopted the equity plan, which includes a bold and aggressive goal of equitably reaching net zero community-wide greenhouse gas emissions by 2040, with a strong emphasis on cutting emissions by 2030. Getting net zero means that the Austin community will reduce their use of fossil fuels to nearly zero. And they said this goal because they believe it is possible. I know it is needed to preserve a livable climate. The question, of course, in regards to all of these climate initiatives and these measures that they want everyone to take to tackle climate change is, what are we going to do when there is not enough wind or there's not enough sunshine for the solar and the windmills to work? And also, how is the current electrical grid going to be supporting all of these new standards? How are we going to be able to transition from fossil fuels just in a very short amount of years to being completely carbon zero by 2030 and 2040? How are we going to get there in such a short amount of time if our current grid cannot even support what the usage that we have now, especially here in California? I can speak for California because we know how the power outages affect everyone. Well, I hope you found this information useful, and I welcome you to get involved at a local level, wherever you're at, with your local representatives, and to keep an eye for these green measures, policies taking place, and find a way to push back against them, because it's not just going to affect our personal liberties, but also the way property rights. It will be definitely affecting property rights, as we've seen, and is only likely to get worse. So we need to be involved and try to find solutions at a local level for this kind of tyranny that's taking place. I thank you for watching, and please be sure to like and share my video.